The Producer Podcast has returned, and this year is anything but average. You're listening to the season 10 premiere of the show, a feat I never thought would happen back when I first started the show in 2020, when my goal was just to give it a try for 2 seasons. And now we're counting down to the 100th episode of the show later this year. To help us reach that 100th episode of the show, I'm excited to be welcoming back producer Chad Gundersen to kick off this season. Today, I'm excited to dive more into Chad's producing journey and things he's learned along the way. So let's dive in and get started. Thank you once again, Chad, for coming on to the Producer Podcast.
Pleasure to be back, man. The fact that I got a call back, as it were, industry terminology there, it's cool. So it's an honor to be back, and I love doing the first one, and hopefully that meant something for you to give me a call again. And so happy to be here, man. Appreciate it.
So I know the first time you were on, you shared a little bit of your story of meeting with your producing partner, Chris Juen, but I kind of wanted to dive a little bit more into that and just even what that partnership kind of looks like for you guys.
Sure.
So maybe just kind of start by, in case people haven't heard that first episode, just telling us kind of how you guys came to be connected.
Yeah. So Chris June and myself, we started Out of Order Studios. We'll be 10 years next summer. So we started in 2015, and it definitely was an interesting way to meet. So Chris is, he was about 20 years in the studio system at the time, and I was about 20 years in the independent space. Chris worked at Sony Pictures, and I understand he's going to be on the show, so I'll let him tell his story a little bit more, and I'll be curious his version of this story too. Hopefully, they line up pretty well. But I had made a movie called The Redemption of Henry Myers, which was a Western. And there was talk of the distributor that we were with, which is now a defunct distributor, no longer around. We were going to do a theatrical run with The Redemption of Henry Myers. Got pretty good reception, so they were going to like, hey, let's put it in theaters, see what it does. During that process, Chris was working at Sony, and he was doing this thing along with this church and with some others, basically helping kind of faith-based and family-based type films come to the area that he's in. He had started this thing called South Bay Family Films. And he had done things like, God's Not Dead and some of these others, just helping these movies, which, as you're familiar with, and a lot of people in our space are, the grassroots behind a lot of faith-based movies, obviously is a pretty big deal. And so he was just kind of helping with that grassroots thing, doing these theatrical pushes for movies. So he got wind of Redemption, was excited about it. Kind of at the last minute before the theatrical took off, we ended up getting a Hallmark deal. So in taking that Hallmark deal, we decided to go that direction. So they kind of, shot away from the theatrical. We weren't completely in agreement with that as the filmmakers, but that is what it is. But they never informed Chris that they weren't taking Redemption to theaters. And of course, he's preparing the way to get this movie into theaters there locally in the South Bay area of LA. And so nobody was responding to him. I guess he had reached out, and again, he can tell that story piece of it. And so he had reached out through the Facebook page for The Redemption of Henry Myers, and I kind of saw it because I was still an admin on the Facebook page, but I really wasn't running it. Some of the marketing people were. And so I just saw this message kind of sitting there in the inbox, and nobody was responding. And he was just like, "Hey, I need to talk to somebody." He didn't say specifically what he needed. And so I just responded and said, "Hey, man, I'm the producer of the show. How can I help you? What can I do for you?" So we went through that whole thing, and he was like, "Well, I guess I'll not plan for that anymore." So a little disappointed, not bad, just. And so we kind of got to talking. I looked him up, and I'm like, "What's this Sony animation, visual effects, high end guy doing? Looking at our little faith-based indie film, right?" So we just kind of got to talking and messaging, and all these kinds of things. And the funny thing is it got to the point where we were kind of talking so much that both of our wives, unbeknownst to each of us, our wives in the background were kind of going, who is this guy that you're talking to? Like, you're lying in bed at night, you're messaging him, and you're doing all these things. and they were both kind of like, are you dating this guy? Like, so Chris and I always kind of laugh and go, yeah, we met online, like we dated online before we decided to get in business together. And so then eventually, and I would go to LA pretty regularly, maybe once a month or once every 2 months at the time. And so I was like, hey, man, I'm heading out to LA for some meetings. Love to just connect, in person. Ended up meeting his wife, had dinner, and just all these things where our backgrounds couldn't be more different. He's 20 years studio, high-end visual effects, high-end animation, big studio stuff, and I'm, on the independent live action side. So not only live action versus, CG, but also big studio versus independent. So there's a lot of differences. But what we started finding out in meeting and having dinner and meeting his wife is that, man, our goals were very similar. Like who we are as men, who we were as believers, how we treat people. Like we were telling stories, and I would stop him or he would stop me and kind of go, I have a very similar story to that about just how we treated people differently as producers, how people would kind of come to us in very weird ways and kind of basically say, you're kind of a very weird, different producer. You're not the producer that I'm used to, or in the sense of used to, many times people just don't talk to producers. Like you just don't have that ability. Like you don't talk to the director, you don't talk to producers, you don't talk to the stars. And this is all the crew and other cast and stuff like that. And that's just not who we are. And to this day, working together for almost a decade, it's still true, right? With The Chosen, we get this all the time, and it's just not who we are. And so that we just found out, Chris and I, we just found out, like, God, there's something here. Like this, God's doing something. God's making a connection. And it's kind of an old adage too that, in the independent world, you don't take on a partner, right? It's hard enough being an independent producer, but let alone bringing a partner into the business, right? Like don't do that. So you kind of have all these things kind of telling us not to do what we were doing, which kind of falls into our title, our company name of Out of Order. And the story behind that is, we were, again, we had known each other now. We had talked, you always have that, oh, hey, let's do something together, right? You always have those conversations with people you meet. Um, and then within a couple of months of that, Chris reaches out and goes, hey, I'm moving to Texas. And I'm like, whoa, too soon, man. Like, we haven't known each other that well. Like, no, we're not. Like, don't move here. And he goes, no, no, no. And Chris is from Texas. He's from El Paso, grew up in El Paso. But his mom lives here in the DFW area. So he's like, no, my mom is there. We've been wanting to get out of LA. He had his two daughters were young at the time. He's like, I got to get out of LA. I just can't be here anymore, just for my own spiritual well-being, all these things. And so he literally quit his job, not having a job, started moving across the country, didn't have a house. They had bought a house, but that house fell out of escrow. The house they were selling in LA didn't sell right, like just all these issues, which eventually all worked out fine. But in that process and in literally the drive from LA with his family in the van from LA to Texas, along the highway somewhere, they pulled over and getting gas or doing whatever. And he and his wife were talking about all these things like, wait, we don't have a job. We don't have a house. We don't really know exactly where we're going to live outside of the Dallas Fort Worth area. Like all of these things that's not what you do as an adult, right? You don't go do those things, but they as a family just had this amazing peace about what they were doing. And so Jen, his wife, said, well, you're doing everything out of order, right? Like everything you're doing is out of the world's order, but we feel and we know and we've prayed about it and we're completely in God's order. And as we all know, God very rarely does things the way he does it that matches the way the world would do it, right? The world system and that sort of thing. So literally on the road, Chris calls me up and goes, hey man, if we ever start a company, we're calling it Out of Order Studios. And I'm like, dude, I love the name. I think it's great. Very shortly after that, we found a project to do together and work together. And that would have been in 2014. And then less than a year later, we officially started Out of Order Studios in the summer of 2015. So obviously the title is what it is. People definitely get a kick out of it and go like, what does that mean? And we tell the story that everything we were doing, Chris was doing, we as a company, how we do things, all these different things, very much out of the world system, out of their order, but very
Mm-hmm.
much in God's order. So that's the story of how we met, and here we are today, almost 10 years later. More than half of that, I guess, we started on The Chosen in 2018, so 6 of those 9 years 9.5 years have been on the Chosen, so it's definitely been the majority of our time. And we had done some other projects and stuff early on in our career, and definitely had some starts and stops on a lot of things.
Hmm.
But obviously, things are pretty crazy now, all in a good way. Again, not complaining by any means, but things are pretty crazy.
I bet. Yeah. So then I'd love to hear, like, with your partnership, what does that look like in terms of like what things does Chris handle versus things that you handle? How do you
Mhm.
work together and play to
Sure.
those differences that you two have?
Yeah, I think one of the again, this is definitely a God thing too, just looking at how God kind of placed us together, because again, on so many levels, we're so different. I mean, even from the like, he's tech support and I'm like, where's the on and off button? Like, don't, like, I'm not here. Like for me, I'm not necessarily bad at tech. I just don't care that much about it. So therefore, I don't put the effort into learning. And again, that's totally on me. And so if and when I need to learn something, Chris will sit me down and go, you have to learn this. And I'm like, okay, fine. But otherwise, I just don't care that much about tech, right? Like it's just not that important to me. And yet Chris is like, he is a early adopter. Like he's a beta tester for Apple. Like he does all these cool things because he's just like tech savvy. So there's just those kinds of differences that are very, very obvious. Again, the most blatantly obvious ones is our background, right? Big studio system, 100 million plus budgets, visual effects driven animation, all these big things within the studio system for a long, long time, and independent live action, right? Very different worlds, right? And so definitely depending on what we're doing, it's always pretty obvious where we should be. Like production is my thing. Like I build budgets, I know production, live action production, all those things. Things like post production, visual effects, structures, building things, as far as teams and stuff, we're both really good at. But again, it goes back to that thing, the way that we treat people, the types of projects, the excellence that we both want. There's so many similarities. And very rarely, not saying it never happens, but very rarely do we ever just don't see eye to eye. Like it's been a very rare occasion where we are just in complete disagreement, right? And so it's always just pretty obvious of, nope, Chris, that's totally you, or nope, Chad, that's totally you, right? And then of course we always jump in and support the other, knowing that, okay, Chris is leading the charge here. How can I support him? How can I help him? And then vice versa, for me and him. And so that's always been a big thing. And, with partnerships, something that we've learned that's been very important and we've always kept at the front is it's kind of like a marriage, right? For a marriage to work, me as the husband, I have to take my wife and my children, they their necessities and for what's best for them needs to be my priority, right? And the same needs to be for my wife, right? So with Chris and I know that he is most concerned and prioritizes me and my family. And Chris knows that I am prioritizing his family. And if we both are doing that together, right? If I know he's got my best interest at heart and he knows that I have his best interest at heart, well, then that works well, right? Versus me going, well, I just got to take care of me and mine, and he's got to take care of him and his, then that's not going to work out really well. And so there's just always been this very good back and forth of, are you guys good, right? And that's even on the personal side of things, right? Of how's the family? How's the relationship with your wife? How are the kids? Like, what's going on? What can we help with outside of this business structure? So that's always been a really big thing for he and I. Is just to have that desire to help the other be the best they can. Because we're so different, if I'm helping him be the best they can, well, that makes me look really good because there are things that he does that I have no clue. And again, vice versa. And so that's always been a big thing about how we've gone. And it's something that we've encouraged others because we do get a lot of people asking, like, how do you guys do it? Like, it seems pretty seamless. You guys do work as a unit and you move as a unit, but at the same time you're just so different in your skill sets and your demeanors and all the different things. You're just very different. So we just get a lot of questions, and that's what it comes down to. And obviously there's a lot of biblical principles in that, and that's where we draw the majority of our things from. And so that's a big part of it. As a bit of a joke on top of that, it's become, with our name Out of Order, I'm very much the out and he's very much the order, right? Like he is a structured process. How do I, put it all together with, spreadsheets and all these different things. he's just very structured, and all of that comes out of the studio, right? Because of these massive teams and these massive things. And I'm kind of that out of the box thinker. I'm the one out ahead and thinking about what's next for our company. How do we make money? How do we pay the bills? Like, how do we do these things? Because the independent in me, I've always been like, I'll scrappy, get it done, figure it out type mentality versus I don't work for someone. I don't work for a studio. And Chris will say in the studio, he would finish a big project, he'd take a little break, and then the studio would go, "Here's your next project," right? And he would be off to the races and he'd put his teams together and do that. And so obviously in the independent world, that's not how it is. It's as an independent producer, like, you better go figure it out. Ain't nobody going to do it for you, right? You got to figure it out. And also just, ideas and stuff like that, which obviously we collaborate a lot on and have, certain tastes and what God's called us to do as a company, what we have personal connection to, all of those things we have to get in sync on. But we've just always found that we just line up on a lot of things, right? And we don't take that for granted. We know exactly how rare that is. We know exactly how blessed and fortunate we are to have that ability to be so different yet so in sync, yet continue to do what God does. And to be honest with you, The Chosen has been the perfect example of that, because when we started The Chosen was this small, scrappy, little independent thing. And when Dallas approached me with it, even initially, and again, this isn't a knock against anybody, but Dallas is even like, "Well, I don't know, Chris, I know you, and that's great that you're partners, but I'm not talking to your company. I'm talking to you, Chad, as the producer." So even initially there, it was kind of like this scrappy little independent thing. And obviously, Chris wasn't quite sure where he was going to fit in and all that. But very quickly, even in season one, the miracle of the fish, right? That was a huge visual effects process that should have taken months to get done. But the way it went down and the chain of events to get us there, Chris really just shined. And if anything, Dallas finally realized, oh, that's why I need Chris here. Like, Chris knows these things, because in that scene, we were supposed to have live fish. They were supposed to be live fish, both live and dead, right? Meaning real fish, both live and dead. And then maybe we would supplement it with some visual effects. And then it turned into where we weren't allowed to use any real fish because of the lake we were shooting on and certain conservation laws and all these different introducing new fish into bodies of water, right? There's all these things that you just can't do. And we found out the fish that we had, we couldn't use at all. Like, we couldn't even have them near the water. We had to get them off the property, like all these different things. And so, 3 days before we shot, 4 days before the shot, Dallas comes to Chris and goes, "Okay, how do we do this 100% CG? And it can't look cheesy. It can't look bad. It can't do any of those things." And I'll let Chris tell the whole story about it, because there's some cool God moments within that whole process. But go watch the miracle of the fish in season one, and there's not one real fish in that entire piece, not one. And so Chris and Will, our special effects supervisor, did an amazing job, obviously with God's help. But and that was kind of where we realized, okay, well, first and foremost, this show is probably not going to stay small long, which obviously it didn't. But even until probably season 3 or so, we didn't really realize the scope of what was happening with The Chosen. But as this show progressed, it started to exemplify Chris and I's differences and our strengths and weaknesses, right? So the production continues to be a live action production, which I drive that and I build the budgets and I do all those things. But because now it's this massive thing, I think we probably had maybe 60 or 70 crew members in season one, which isn't small, but I'd say an average independent film, right? Kind of that sort of thing. And in this last season, in season 5, and we're getting ready to do season 6 and season 5, we were averaging 400 crew members every day, right? And then sometimes upwards of 500 or 600 cast, including extras. So there were days we had 1,000 people on set, right? And to organize that chaos, Chris is like, "Get out of the way. Like, I know how to do this." And he knows how to do, and he just does an amazing job at it. And so we just continue to see these things to where this small little independent show is now turning into kind of this bigger independent studio global hit. So now it's taking both of our skill sets to manage this thing, right? And so, and not that he wasn't, obviously he was there in season 1 doing things that I'm like, I can find somebody to make cool fish, but I don't know how to spearhead that. And Chris was like, get out of the way. I know how to do it. I should have had 3 months, but I have 3 days. And he did figure it out, and they did an amazing job. And that is so much kudos to Chris and obviously Will as well, to pull that off, because it was such a tiny little thing. But it's something that, Chris and I, we laugh at all the time, because Chris will say, whenever I met and we were doing a project, he'd be like, all right, well, let's talk to legal. Like, where's the legal department? I'm like, legal department? Like, we don't have a department. Like, I'm like, I have an attorney that I've had forever. What we will do is we will look at the contracts and make sure that we are happy with it, from a deal point, structure, timeframes, all these different things. And then we go to the attorney and say, okay, now you make it legal, right? Like, we don't have a department just to go, y'all deal with it. Now, even The Chosen has done that, right? Early on, we had independent attorneys and legal counsel and business affairs, and now that's an internal thing that we have with The Chosen. So there's just so many things about Chris and I and where we've gone and what we've been and what we're becoming that are very much in line with The Chosen as well. And so it's been a great training ground for us, but at the same time, we can see very obviously why God put us where He put us, specifically with the show, right? And obviously with Dallas and his amazing vision, we're just excited to be a part of that and excited to see what God does next. So
I definitely hadn't heard some of the stuff about like you that being the reason you couldn't use real fish for that
yep.
scene before.
Well,
So
I'll
that
encourage your audience and you. The Chosen has so many YouTube videos, and there literally is a video called "The Miracle of the Fish," and it's one of our best videos. So I always encourage people, because it gives people a really great insight into how that stuff is done, but then at the same time, just what God was doing. And there are so many of these Red Sea moments, as they've been dubbed in The Chosen, of where we literally are like, I don't know what to do, Lord. And you
mhm.
got to kind of do this, like, Lord, help us out. Like, we're lost. Like, again, a normal, a normal production, which by no means are we, would have gone, there's no way we can do this in 3 days. There's no way. And that's when we go, there has to be, because God brought us here. God will bring us through it, right? That's the Red Sea
Mhm.
moment. God, you brought me to the Red Sea. Now you got to bring me through it. But what are you going to do? Are you going to kick and scream and complain, which is probably still a little bit of that? Or are you going to go, all right, Lord, I'm here, I'm open. And again, in that video, it talks about some cool moments with Will and with others of just kind of God going, here you go, here's your moment.
Mhm.
And as long as, I think as long as we continue to glorify Him in that and stay humble, then He'll continue to do that, and take us through these crazy moments. But that's a good one for sure.
Oh yeah. So then I'd also be curious to hear with your partnership, like how did you know when you first started it with Chris that like that was the right move or it was the right time to kind of do that for you?
I would say I didn't know, right? But I definitely had a piece about it. And again, kind of like I said earlier, there are people that I've worked with over the years that I'll still continue to work with, but really at no point have I ever thought about, ooh, we should have a partnership. Like, and my wife's even been questioned by other wives in the industry, like, you took on a partner? Like, why would you do that? Like, you don't do that. Like, again, it's that whole idea of, and again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but again, you have to be careful with the mentality of it. But as an independent, you got to make sure that you can pay your bills. You got to make sure you can take care of your family. And now all of a sudden, if you're going, okay, now that load is over two people. But if anything, what we say a lot is that Chris and I could go off on our own and have pretty successful careers, right? Like we can manage and do, but we're just so much better together. We're so much better as a unit because there's so many things that he knows that I don't, and that God has gifted him with that I am not gifted with, right? And so it's just kind of like this is the body, right? That's another biblical thing, right? There in ministry and church, you need all these pieces to do that. And really, if you think about it, and again, yet again, The Chosen is that perfect example. Is there is nothing too big or small that Out of Order couldn't handle. Like there's nothing. Like you give me $1 million movie. I don't know if I want to go back to making low budget movies anymore. And not the $1 million is a little amount of money, but in the movie world, that's not a big budget, right? That's an independent thing. But I would probably argue, I don't even know if you can make a movie for $1 million anymore. Just the cost of things is nuts now. But we can do this small couple $1 million movie, independent, scrappy thing And we would be 100% confident that honestly, we'd probably kill it better than most. Like we just have that ability, whether it's the people we know or the connections that God's given us or just the talents that God's given us personally. But then at the same time, we also wouldn't be afraid of $100 to $150 million feature because Chris has done that and he's done it really, really well. And I'll just brag on him. I remember Chris ended up working on this animated feature after he left Sony. He was probably out. We were probably partners for, I don't know, maybe 2 years or so. And Sony had this project that was in trouble. And it had a deadline that was like, we have to get it done now or we're scrapping the whole movie. And I remember being on calls and hearing Chris say things and stuff like that. And basically what was starting to be said was, okay, we can't finish this movie. It's not going to get done. Like we're in a lot of trouble. And then all of a sudden in these meetings, it started being said, but if there's one person that can pull this off, it's Chris Juen. Like this is what's being said 2 years after he left Sony. People going, if this can be pulled off, if they can get this movie done in time, it's Chris Juen. So they give Chris Juen a call, and Chris almost tells him no. And it's funny, I actually kind of became his agent in that moment. I said, "Oh no, no, no." I said, "Oh no, we're going to have this conversation." Now, mind you, I did very little, if anything, to help this happen outside of just convincing Chris. No, we as a company need to look at this. We need to do this. And again, our brains just work different, right? So he had a perspective of, well, I can't run off and go do a job and leave Chad. And I'm like, well, no, 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 that's not necessarily what's going to happen here. But it's going to happen, and it has happened even since then, where I'll go do a job, but I'm doing the job as out of order. Now, Chris may help and support, but for the most part, I'm doing the work. And in this scenario, he did that. And so this was one of those moments where, again, and I told Chris, I said, this is a testament to all that you know, all that you've learned, all the skills that God has given you, to really let that shine, right? And then this allows Out of Order as a company to continue to grow. And so this is just one of those God moments of God going, it's kind of like the flood, right? The guy on the roof, and I'm sending a piece of wood and then a boat and then a ship and then a helicopter, and the guy drowns and goes, God, why did I die? He goes, I gave you every opportunity and you didn't, just because I physically didn't come and do it. But that's not how it's done, right? There are these moments. And I see that as a moment of going, oh, this is a cool moment for us as a company to shine. So let me help you. If anything, kind of help, because then I can kind of help you negotiate a deal and all these different things. And it ended up being a great thing because it also happened literally the moment COVID happened. Like it was happening right then where things were going not well for us and all these different things just because the world was in chaos. And so that started, and The Chosen was taking off and all these things. So it just rolled into all these big things. But it was just a testament to Chris and his ability to go in. And by the way, he did save that film. He did help them get it finished. He did get it out on time. And they were all just like, sure. Like who'd have ever thought that it could be pulled off, but they even knew that if it could be done, they didn't think it could, but if it could be done, Chris is the guy to do it. Right. And so God just continues to show us that. So we as a company, that's why we just say we're not afraid of anything. Like I'm not afraid of $150 million movie, and he's not afraid of a little $2 million movie, and honestly, neither one of those are our goals as a company. Like we're not looking to go make, a couple hundred, not that that'd be a bad thing to make a $200 million movie or anything, but that's just not what our goals are. Because I also think something that Chris learned, and he can definitely speak more to this, is there is so much waste within the studio system, right? But there's a lot of, Peter to pay Paul type stuff where, certain companies are feeding other companies and all these kinds of things. And so what we have really focused on, and The Chosen has been a big thing of that, is doing things at a high level of excellence. And then people find out the budgets and they're like, wow, that's interesting. And people say that about The Chosen all the time. They find out what we're spending. And again, we're spending way more than we spent early on. But for a show it's going on to its sixth season. Obviously, we're doing seven. We're going into the sixth season. We're definitely considered a global hit. Like we are global. It's a massive show. Ratings better than most any show out there, and especially eyeballs that we have. But I would say we're half the budget we should be. Like if The Chosen was on Netflix from day one, right? Like it got picked up or they created it themselves, a period drama with a massive cast, right? Because we have the huge cast because of all the disciples and Jesus and Mother Mary and Magdalene and all these people. Like we very rarely have less than 15, 20 people, in cast alone. But I think we have 100 to 130 cast members every season. Like it's just nuts. Like it's just huge. Like that's just not normal. So any show that's in its sixth season, global hit would be no less than twice our budget. No less. Like hands down. Like let's just say I know what Taylor Sheridan's budgets are for his shows, and we're half, if not less than what he gets to do his shows. And again, I'm not knocking Taylor at all. Obviously, what he does is amazing, and those shows are huge. But that just shows what we're capable of doing, what Dallas is capable of doing, what Chris and I, with the other producers, are capable of doing. If you're just wise with what you have versus this frivolous spending that I think a lot of studios and networks and platforms and stuff do. So yeah, so that's kind of one of the big things that we try to focus on. And like I said, we're not afraid to tackle anything, and we look forward to seeing what we're going to tackle next.
Definitely. Yeah. That's always the fun part of this industry is not knowing what's coming next.
It's always different. It's always different.
So then one last question I had kind of on the producing partnership side of things is just like for other producers out there that maybe they've kind of found their Chris June person, like what advice
You
would you
you can't you can't
give?
have my Chris Juen. So just so you know. So
Oh,
sorry,
sounds
go
good.
ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, just like what advice would you maybe give of like maybe make sure you talk about this or consider this before you actually like enter fully into a
Mhm.
partnership?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, there's a million things to talk about, and Chris and I, even to this day, a decade later, we still kind of go, "Hey, what do you think about this? Like, what are your thoughts, or what are your processes, or what's going through your brain in this?" And again, we continue to say how fortunate and blessed we are that 99 out of 100 we're pretty close to the same page. So again, I definitely there's going to be a lot of credit to God to partnering us there, and that we were just smart enough to say yes. But I would say that probably at the core of it is really it's more about where your values at, right? And not just as believers, because I think two believers could partner and go, this is not working, right? But just like some of the things that Chris and I talked about early on is just like our approach and the way that we treat people and the way we talk to people and the way we care about people. And while obviously we love to have recognition for what we do, at the same time, you know I would, if I'm up on stage or I'm doing, I want to talk about other people. Like I've even mentioned on this call, like I want to talk about Will, the supervisor. Like I'll say right now, Carrie Navarro is my right hand. I can't do what I do without her, right? And she is an unsung hero. People like Renee Moats that have been with us, like there are people that I can make a list of that I would rather give them the credit, because one of the things that I believe I'm good at, and Chris is the same way, and this is one of our core beliefs, is that I'm okay being the dumbest guy in the room. I want to surround myself with people way smarter than me, right? And all those people that I mentioned and many others, they're just smarter than me. They're better than me at certain things. One of the gifting that I have is leadership, and so. But I think good leaders are more servant-hearted minded, and that's where Chris and I are, right? We joke all the time. Chris and I can walk on set and nobody knows who we are. They're just like, who are the lazy grips over there not doing anything, right? And then they go, oh, you guys are the producers, right? And it's just kind of this thing of going, I don't need to be known. I don't want to be known. If anything, I want to be known as that's a weird producer, right? Like that's a weird boss in a good way, in a positive way. And so I think that's one of the big things that, again, Chris and I, we just find ourselves just agreeing on those things and the approach of it. And again, there's humility and there's false humility, right? And, false humility, you kind of are seeking attention, or there's a sense of pride in false humility versus just going, no, I may not like whatever you're doing, but at the same time, if that's your choice, that's your choice. Like, and I'm not here to change your mind or do whatever. Versus, again, it goes back to I can 9 times out of 10 guess what Chris is going to do and how he's going to respond to something, because obviously that takes time. So that's a big thing. So, but I also would probably say in that same sense, don't be afraid to say this isn't working, right? Because pray about it, get your wives to pray about it. Our wives are smarter than we are too, and they're definitely more spiritually connected, which most women are. They're just their intuition, the intuition that God blessed them with, is different than a man's intuition, right? Because guys, we just don't care, right? We're just like, it's fine. And women are like, might want to dig into that a little bit. So that was a big piece of it. But we joke all the time and go, I think our wives are more in sync and closer than Chris and I are. And we work together every day. Chris and I do. and our wives don't. They're not together every day. They're together a lot. We see each other a lot. We have a building, we have all these things, we have business. Our kids are similar ages, so the kids are close, and there's a lot of neat things there. So all of those things were important. Like if our wives didn't get along, that would be bad. Like that would not go well. Like it just wouldn't, right? But that was one of the things that we did before we even partnered up is let's go hang out. Like let's go to dinner. Let's just talk, and those types of things. So I think just kind of getting to know people outside of just work. Because I think the focus is the work, right? Which the work is important and those types of things. But what are your core values? What matters to you? What kinds of projects matter to you? All those things I think need to come into play. And obviously above everything is you better just pray about it because I highly doubt if you're really asking God and they're really asking God that God's going to tell you two different things, right? But if there's a check in your spirit, if there is maybe it's just a pause, maybe it's not a no, maybe it's just a pause, or make sure you ask these questions. I think if you truly seek God in those moments and just, again, back to that humble thing, humble yourself and going, all right, Lord, help me out here, help me understand. And those were things that we did very early on. And we just kind of kept going, it just doesn't make complete sense, but why not? And it continued to just follow that leading of the Holy Spirit. And so here we are. So I think that's a big thing. It's just kind of getting to know each other on a personal level, not just a professional level.
Yeah. Even people I work with frequently that aren't producers, like it's mainly because of the time I've spent getting to know
Yep.
them personally and not
Right.
as
Yeah.
professionals.
Yeah. Well, and I think even the work side of it too, like at the end of the day, Chris and I, we're not afraid. Like I'll outwork you any day, right? Like, oh, you want to stay late? Well, I'm staying late. Like, oh, you're going to go out there and pick up trash. I'm going to go pick up trash with you, right? Like there isn't, and we're not doing it as a competition, but that's just what our hearts are. Like we're, at the end
Mhm.
of the day, we hire a lot of people to do jobs, but at the same time, like if I see trash, I'm going to go pick it up. I'm going to. I'll go get coffee for you. I got no problem getting coffee for you. Now, I may go have a conversation with the person that I'm paying to get coffee for you, because then it's like, well, wait a minute. If I'm paying somebody to get coffee, why am I getting the coffee? Right. So there's a
Mhm.
balance there of not being willing to do it versus, no, I'm providing a job, which is my job as the producer, is to oversee this chaos and this madness. But if I am go getting coffee, well, now all of a sudden I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And whoever's supposed to get the coffee isn't doing their job. So that's a whole other conversation. But I'm not afraid to get you coffee. And neither is Chris. If anything, we may fight over who's going to get the coffee for that person that's sitting out in the field freezing their butt off because we asked them to watch that fence line or something random that happens
Mhm.
on the shows. So
Yeah. Yeah, I got some memories of having to sit out there and watch
we've
something
all done it,
random.
man. Don't tell me you're a filmmaker if you haven't sat in a field, sat in an intersection of a highway, yelled at random people to be quiet because you're rolling, whatever the thing is, going 3 blocks over to ask the guy to stop mowing his lawn while we're shooting because I can hear it in the background of my shot. So all the things, we've done it all. So.
So then one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, I saw a clip from an interview you did earlier this year where you were talking about this family mentality versus team mentality,
Mm,
and how you had somebody come in who kind of helped better implement that. And I
sure.
kind of wanted to dive into that because working especially in the indie and the Christian side of the industry, I've seen a lot of that family mentality and sets trying to bring that out. But then I've also seen when that hasn't maybe made for the best set life either. So just
There's
yeah,
there's a lot of dysfunctional families out there. Let's just say that,
yes, that's for
right?
sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess like maybe to start, just kind of like before, I think it was Mark that came in and kind of
Mhm.
talked with you guys. Like, how were you doing things before you came in?
Yeah, I don't think we've really changed the way we do things. It's more about the perspectives and the expectations on people, right? And
Okay.
so yeah, I think the family mentality is an important thing because I think you need to love on people and treat them that way, right? And as the body of Christ, we are the body of Christ. We are the family. We are grafted in. We are adopted. All of those things that we as believers say, there is an importance to family dynamic. And so by no means is this disregarding that or even really changing that. But what Mark really brought in was more the mentality as we grew and got bigger, right? And Mark joined the team, and Mark, he came out of, he was at DreamWorks and helped run DreamWorks for many years, was at Universal, oversaw some really, really big shows. And so Mark he's wicked smart. Like he is just, and he knows it. And he laughs and goes, I'm not sure how I got here or why I'm here, but I love being here and he loves being a part of this. And so to have him as a part of the team and kind of he's head of production for the whole thing. It's now called 5 and 2, but the Chosen Inc. is what it was for a long time, and now they've changed it to 5 and 2. So that's Dallas and the entire company. We are out of order, so 5 and 2, or the Chosen hires out of order to produce the show, right? So that's kind of the dynamic and the structure. So Mark works on the 5 and 2 side as head of all those productions, right? Because there's more productions coming. We Out of Order is producing an animated series. At Chosen Con, they announced Moses and Joseph and the Book of Acts and all these things that are about to come. So obviously they needed a Mark as a studio head, as a studio executive to kind of oversee all of that. So that's where Mark came from. Unbelievably blessed to have him. I've learned so much from him, and I love gleaning from him because, again, he's just his perspectives. And obviously, he's worked with that little guy named Spielberg for quite a few years. So he obviously is a pretty smart guy. And so for Mark to come in and just kind of go, hey, we should probably shift our perspective. And a lot of this came about because of the fact that as we grew, so starting in season 1, we were this scrappy little independent project where we were, kind of just going, hey, whoever will come and work for us, we need. Obviously, there are certain people that have been with us since day one. Akis, our DP, James, our production designer. There's various people, Mandy and hair and makeup, and Ashley and Leila and wardrobe. All these people have been with us since like season 1 or season 2 or halfway through season 1. So all of them have been through the beginning. But there's also a lot of crew members and stuff that, when you're not paying a lot, you can only get certain people, right? You just can't, right? And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but there's just certain levels of people and talents and things like that that you're going to bring on. And when you're small and independent and pretty low budget, then you kind of take what you can get. Now, yes, we've scored some unbelievable people, so this isn't a knock against anyone. But what it started turning into, and kind of call it season 3 and into season 4, we are now operating at a level that's the highest level out there. Like we pay people the same that any other big TV show does. Now we don't have the overall money, but our rates based on unions, and actually we technically actually pay a little bit more because we also take our shows theatrical. So we had to do special deals with the unions because TV shows don't go into theaters, right? There are theatrical contracts and there are TV contracts in this world of crew and camera and cast and drivers and all these things. And so when we came along, they're like, well, wait a minute, we have a theatrical agreement and then we have a TV agreement, but we don't have both. So we actually do pay a little bit more in this kind of hybrid agreement that we've done for our crew members. So as we started doing that, and as the show started performing at a level, it just kind of got to this thing like, you got to pull your weight, right? And unfortunately, some of these smaller independent people that have only done the small independent, now all of a sudden they're being asked to operate at the highest level, these network, big budget type things, which is what we had become. Some people from the beginning were able to adjust into that world and grow into that, and some were not. And so the idea of this family thing, and I think I even said it in that other interview, is you can't throw your family out of your family, right? Like, I know people like to say things like disowning and stuff like that, and obviously there's a rare occasion, but at the end of the day, you are like your family and you can't. But then there's an unhealthy forgiveness when it comes to work when you're dealing with your family, right? Like I love my family and I would forgive my brother and my sister and my mom and my dad for so many things, right? Now, I may not be happy with it or it may ruin our relationship, but as a believer, I'm going to forgive you and I'm going to love you. Now, how our relationship continues, depending on how good or bad that is, it may change. But at the end of the day, I say, look, you can't throw your family out of your family. Your family's your family, right? And so, but when you're doing that and applying that in a work setting, and that family member is not pulling their weight and not doing the job that is expected, again, at the end of the day, this is a job. And this is a job where millions of dollars are being spent, right? There's an expectation, all these kinds of things. And so what we had to kind of shift is to a team mentality, right? And on a team, you got to pull your weight, right? And we'll use sports. That's my big thing. I was football and a big fan, and as a football player, we've all seen it, right? There are, and again, pick any sport. There's been plenty of really, really good players that on this team they were subpar, and then all of a sudden they go and they get traded or they move or they whatever and go to a different team and they become a rock star. So it's not necessarily a knock against them. And some, to be honest with you, they just can't go from college to the pros, right? So there's a piece of that in what I was talking about. Like we started high school and we were college level, and now we're at the pros level. So some people, like that high school star, may not make it all the way to the pros, or he may be a rock star in college, but never they just can't make that transition. So there's some of that in there too. So we really just kind of shifted to this team mentality, but then at the same time, we're like, no, we can't get away from the family side of it. Like we have to treat people differently. We do have to love on people. We do have to make sure that they know that we are different as believers. And so, yeah, we kind of shifted that is that we're a team with a family mentality. And you hear that even within teams too, like, oh, we're all a family in this locker room. We're all family. We're all family. So there is a level of love there. But then at the same time, you understand and you get it when you go, okay, but yeah, you can't be on the team anymore. Love you, appreciate you, but you just can't really do this anymore. So that was kind of the shift there. Because that, and kind of going back to that, we do want to be different. We want to be, and again, Dallas's mentality is this way. Chris and I, Mark, Jamie, other producer, Carrie, who I mentioned, we just have this mentality, and it's kind of sad that the mentality that we have or the way that we treat people is taken with such surprise. And I say that in the sense of we've had multiple examples of this over the multiple years now that we've been doing the show. Of we hear a story of a crew member whose child is homesick, right? Or my mom's sick and about to pass away, or my grandma this, or whatever. Pick anything that just happens to everybody in their everyday lives. And these things happen all the time. But in this industry, it is a tough, grueling, especially when you're in production. Like you are working 14, 16-hour days, 12 hours on set with an hour to get there, an hour to go home, and all these things, right? So minimum 12-hour days. You're doing this for weeks, if not months on end. And so the ability for us in this industry to maintain family and maintain healthy relationships is very tough. And again, there's no shortage of stories in this industry of families that have ended, marriages that have ended. And so whenever on our show, when we tell our department heads and other people, like, if you know of anything going on, we want to know. Now, we may or may not be able to do anything about it, but sometimes it's as simple as going, you need to go home and be with your sick child. Go love on your child. But the odd thing about that is when we do that, again, whatever the circumstances, we'll tell people, go home and be with your child. And this is one example. Obviously, there's other things, but this is one. The mentality that comes back from some of these people is, no, don't fire me. No, they'll be fine. I'll get my mom to come and watch them. My grandma will come by. The neighbor can take care of it. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about my dog. And again, sometimes it is as simple as a dog, but dogs are imperfect people, right? Like that's a big thing. And to see people when we say, oh, no, you're not fired. And if anything, we may actually pay you for a day or two to go take care of that. Now, obviously, we do have a business to run, so we can't just pay you indefinitely. We can't and we may not be able to pay you at all. But even just to have the mentality of going, no, go home and take care of your family. Take care of the things that God has blessed you with, whether you're a believer or not, right? And to tell these people, to see the countenance on their faces, and then when they come back and they're rejuvenated because they were able to go home and take care of that sick child, they were able to go love on that individual, that family member, or whatever, take care of whatever that issue is. And sometimes we don't need to know what the issue is, right? Not my business, but if you want to share it, we'll talk about it. But that's just not the mentality of this industry, right? It is, hey, there's 10 like you, 20 better. If you don't like the circumstances, tough luck, go away. We'll find somebody else to replace you. If you can't be here, then fine, just leave, right? That's the mentality. And it's just amazing that when we tell people, like, no, go take care of you and yours, you have a job when you come back. I mean, and then when they do come back, it's amazing, even the amount, the desire to be even better at what they do, the desire to commit to that. And now we're starting to get people like, I can't tell you the amount of times last season, and there's some other big shows that shoot around us. And we had people literally, they were going to the department heads going, can I get a meeting with Carrie, with Chad, with Chris, with Jamie? Which again, you don't get meetings with producers. It's just not you don't do that, right? You talk to your department heads, the department head comes to the production manager comes to the producers. There's all these layers, right, of how you get there. And of course, we're like, sure, we'll meet with them, let them come in. And then for them to come into our office and all but beg to be on our show because of the stories that they had heard, that we pay people on time, we treat people well. We do these little things like Dallas started doing this in season one. We call them $100 days. And literally once or twice a season, everybody on set, we just walk around and give everybody $100, like an actual $100 bill. And the countenance, I mean, again, at the end of the day, I mean, $100 is $100. I'm not discounting that, but it's such a minimal thing for us to do. But the countenance that's changed, and to see the people just get excited about that things, and it's just like this is what we're supposed to be doing as believers, right? Just loving on people, and even though it may be a bit of a stretch, because again, I manage the budget, so sometimes I'm like, that's a whole bunch of $100 bills there with 400 people on set, right? But at the same time, like when you plan for that and you do that and then it just makes people excited and feel loved on and that sort of thing. So it's just been something that we've really just wanted to focus on and figure out and make not just The Chosen different, but we as a company, we as producers. So that's just something that we just look for. We just look for those moments because again, we're supposed to be God's hands extended, and like then what? And we're a Jesus show for Pete's sake. Come on, like come on,
Yeah.
we're a Jesus show, right? And again, but at the same time, so it was that hard transition of going, I love you, I believe in you, but unfortunately, you can't be a part of this team anymore. And trust
Hmm.
me, people say it all the time, Chad. Oh, I want to be a producer. I want to do these things, and people like the sexy things, right? Unfortunately, the sexy things, the premieres and the this, and oh, you're the boss and you're in charge, and all these different things. That is such a small facet of what we do. And trust me, there is nothing harder. There is nothing more painful than to have to let somebody go. Right now, there's certain times where you're like, oh, this was easy. Like, and again, that's a pretty rare occasion that there's something hostile or weird or threatening or whatever. But there are times where it's just like, I have to make a business decision here, right? We
Hmm.
are running a business, right? And you have to be wise in that. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so I never encourage people to be a producer. I'm like, man, this isn't easy stuff. Like, unfortunately, it's all I've ever known. I am a rarity in what I do. I've only ever produced since 19 years old. It's all I've ever done. I don't know. Don't hand me a camera. Don't ask me to set up that C stand. Don't none of that stuff. Right? It'll get done in a way that's probably not 100% right. Then the smart people will come behind me and go, "I'll fix that for you. I'll do that there for you." Like, just don't touch it, Chad. I'm like, I'll stay out of the way. But again, we all have our gifts, and we kind of should follow that. So.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how you're kind of setting up those two mentalities. I guess one other question on that I had is just like, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit in there, but how do you communicate to like your crew, kind of how you operate so that those expectations are set up right?
It only happens in time because people don't expect that. They just don't. Now, the good thing is, and this is another thing in a testament to The Chosen and myself and the other producers in Dallas and the owners of the company and those that run the company, we have really maintained a lot of the same crew since day one. We actually, I guess this would have been must have been season four. We were sitting down with the camera union, the local 600, right? Negotiating contracts, talking about differences, as the budget's raised and just talking in general. And the local, the 600 rep, he goes, hey, I just want to say something. He goes, you guys are a rare anomaly. He goes, no show that I've ever been, and he's been doing this, I don't know how many years, at least decades. He goes, you have the same crew come back year after year. And he goes, you just don't see that, right? Like, it's like, oh, you may be on the show for a season or two, and then they move on, they get somebody different, or the crew member wants to move on going, I've had enough of this. I'm out of this crazy town, sort of thing. And so we started hearing that a lot. And then we kind of sat back and we even looked at ourselves going, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people that literally from day one, right? Season one, scrappy, couldn't pay you a whole lot of money sort of thing, all the way now going into season six. And a lot of the same people are there, right? And even the ones that aren't there, they are still responsible for how amazing the show is. So I think to prepare people, a lot of that honestly has to with the word of mouth from the people that have been working with this. So like the example I gave where people asked them to come in the office, well, they heard about that from somewhere, right? They heard about it from some other crew member about how they're treated and da, 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 and appreciated and all those things. It came from within. So I think anybody that gets up on their soapbox and pounds their chest and goes, look, I'm different and work for me and blah, 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 versus I'm just going to show you. Like, again, and you can say it all you want. We're saying it right now, but at the end of the day, what I say doesn't matter. It's what I do, right? And how you treat people and those types of things. And again, just talking to people, having conversations with people. It's just, it's still, I don't know, I don't want it to get old, but it is still amazes me when I have a conversation with people and they're just like, aren't you the producer? And I'm like, well, yeah. And almost like, why are you talking to me? And I'm like, why would I not talk to you? Like, I just don't get it. And so then I watch other producers, I watch other people, and I'm like, why would you not? Like, if anything, I should be the most thankful. Myself and Dallas and Chris and the rest of everybody else, Jamie, Mark, Brad Pello, all the Daryl Eves, all these different people, like, we cannot be more thankful because it is them that helped us get here. We couldn't have done this on our own. And so it is them that got us here, the cast members as well, like all those things. And so it's a privilege to work in this industry, right? And then to be able to turn around and do something that you love and care about, and something that, as believers, is advancing the kingdom. Like, man, there are just so many boxes getting checked, and so how can you not be thankful? How can you not be excited? Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's not for the faint of heart. Yes, I discourage young filmmakers or even old filmmakers, old people that are wanting to get into filmmaking. I discourage it all the time. I'm like, don't do this. Don't do it for a living. I know it seems cool, but it is hard. And I don't need to tell you this, as well as anybody. But then I say, but if I can say all that and you still are like, oh no, I'm doing this, well, then maybe you're going in the right direction, right? But you better know that you know, right? That this is what you're called to do, especially as a believer, because the temptations will come, the things will come, the heartache will come. I mean, I've been told no a million times more than I've been told yes in this industry. But I always just lean back going, and I know, but I know this is what God called me to do. So the no doesn't bother me. It's more about, okay, well then, did I do something wrong? Then I should fix it. Or maybe the no is actually from God. God kind of going, protecting you from something here. This is a good no to have. And there's definitely been hindsight sometimes looking back going, yep, definitely God protected me out of that one. Glad I didn't touch that. So, but it's hard. It's just hard. So,
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a struggle everybody has in this industry, even
mm.
if they're not a producer. They're just,
Oh yeah. Oh, in anything, any crew position. But again, the mentality is, again, I said it before, there's 10 like you, 20 better. And so the move on rate, I'll find somebody because I don't like you or I didn't like this or whatever. Um, but again, it's just grueling, right? I mean, and
mhm.
so it's tough. It's really, really tough. But those that love it, they wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm one of them, unfortunately. I just, the abuse is, I guess, part of what I was made for. I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, then I guess I had one kind of wrap up question here for you. Hopefully, this isn't too big of a can of worms.
Oh man.
But I was just kind of, curious to hear your thoughts because the talk of AI has been crazy
Mm.
across the industry. Like, just kind of what are your thoughts? And are there certain ways that you guys have been implementing AI into your filmmaking process at this point?
Yeah. We'll definitely write that question down for Chris because he'll have a much better answer than mine.
All right.
My opinion on AI is, honestly, I think it's like anything else technology wise that we've seen, right? From the move from film cameras to digital cameras, from hand drawn animation to CG animation. Like, we've seen all these things, and I think AI is just kind of the next thing. It's kind of like the virtual walls too, like they're kind of there
Hmm.
too, in the green screen virtual wall world of it. I personally think right now it's very much in its infancy, which is weird because artificial intelligence type stuff has been around for a very long time. Right now, not at the extent that it's advanced over the last, call it 2 or 3 years. Right? I mean, basically, I think a lot of people during COVID were really bored and holed up in their houses, only working like this right here over a computer. And I think all the AI geniuses go, we're going to take AI from this theoretical thing to reality. Again, I could be wrong. That's just my opinion on it. And so I think those that embrace it are smart. But I think those that feel threatened by it I think you're immature to be threatened by it. No different than the funny thing is like film now all of a sudden, now all these filmmakers are going, I want to go shoot on film again. Like, yes, we had a good, call it a decade, maybe a little bit more in this digital space. And now all of a sudden people are like, okay, that's fine. We know that, but I want to go shoot on film. I want to go do those things. And so to deny that the digital camera world didn't change filmmaking is foolishness. But to then say that it's the only way is also foolishness, right? I mean, I think there's a movie coming out now that somebody shot entirely on their iPhone, like at a high level, not just a fun little student film. But I joke too and say, well, my phone is 4K, and we didn't even shoot The Chosen on 4K for many years. Like, we were 2K and 3K and 2.5K and some of these others just based on the camera we were using. Now obviously that camera's way bigger than that, but at the end of the day, it's there's the technology is there, so to not use it is foolishness. So that's my opinion on AI. I just think that I think that it'll get rid of a lot of lower level jobs. Like, we've seen it. Like, we've done the examples of get into the chat GPT and go, hey, I'm reading an outline for a story that's X, Y, and Z. And it will spit out some stuff that you're like, that's actually pretty impressive, right? Like, give me a zombie movie set in, post-apocalyptic, blah, 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 in northern Maine, with the hero that's, 6'2" and brown hair and has a limp, right? Like, and it will spit out crap that's just, it's really, really impressive. But then again, you start seeing, like, I know a big controversy this year was like the Coca-Cola commercials with the polar bears, right? And the trucks that, like, Coca-Cola has been known for these Fanta polar bear truck commercials for years. Some of it was real, some of it was CG, but definitely not AI. And this one that came out this year, it's AI, and everybody's kind of like, it lost that personal touch. And I think that's what AI will never, ever capture. It will never capture that personal touch. Like, it will never be a real actor. It may be an image of a real actor. It may be now if an an actor wants to look younger, that's a cool thing, right? We saw that with the Tom Hanks movie, recently, and they just de-aged him and they did some stuff. And I think we'll continue to see that, which I think is great, because now that actor that is older can play himself and it looks better, right? Versus there were a lot
Mm-hmm.
of digital things that they were doing that just looked kind of creepy. Or you have to go get a different actor, which is fine. And I think there's places for that. So I think there's going to be a lot of these kind of non-essential moments that just accentuate what we're wanting to do as filmmakers. But I don't think it's going to replace writers, because, again, even those stories that I was saying how good they are, there's just something missing, right? And so, but what it might do is it helps skip you some steps to get to that place. So we as producers, as I consider myself a creative producer. I'm not involved in the creative side of The Chosen, but that's actually the rarity for me. I'm normally pretty involved on the creative side, but I don't want to touch The Chosen. The Chosen is awesome. And the writing team, Ryan and Tyler, and obviously Dallas, they've done a great job. They don't need my help, and they can do their thing. But for me as a creative to do what I just said, to kind of go, okay, I want to tell a story, right? And I'm not a screenwriter. By no means, I'm not. So I still would even take that weird story that I just gave you and say, okay, here's the essence of what I want. Now you go make it real. And so I think that will never go away. I don't think AI will replace that. I don't think they'll replace actors. I don't think they're going to do any of those things. And so there's definitely a lot of fear there, because there are ways to monetize, AI. Like, for example, voices now. Like, there's AI programs where you and I right now talking, you could take this entire podcast and go, I want it in Spanish. And it literally will take your voice and my voice, the tone, the cadence, all of the things. And you and I will then be speaking in Spanish, not some guy that speaks Spanish coming and translating and then laying their voice on top of mine and their voice on top of yours. It is literally you and I talking, but we're talking in Spanish. So it's kind of like, okay, I get there, that now all of a sudden I would have paid that person to do that dubbing session versus I don't have to do anything. So now that actor that may, like the you or me, may kind of go, well, you were going to pay that other guy $1,000 a day to come in and do this, and now you're basically getting it for free. How do I play into this, right? So again, there's some things to work out in there, but I also think that most actors would prefer their own personal voice, their own tone, their own cadence to be speaking in Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or Mandarin or whatever the language is when they don't speak any of those language and go, that's my voice saying those words, but in Mandarin. That's a big deal. That's pretty cool. So I think there's a lot of things that I think people just need to embrace it and see it. So, but to know where it goes, who knows? But to not embrace it and to follow it and to track it and to kind of learn as it goes, I think people would be foolish not to do so. So um, that's what I got. That's
Awesome.
my 2 cents on that. So,
Yeah.
but I tell you, Chris's answer is gonna be way better than mine. It'll be way cooler. So.
All righty. I'll look forward to hearing from him. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap this episode up. So thank you once again, Chad,
Come
for
on,
coming
man.
on for season 10.
Come on, man. That's awesome.
Great
What
time.
season was I in before? What season was that?
Season 3 was your first um
That is
time on the
crazy.
show.
So
Yep.
you've done, wow. So 7 seasons later, here we are again. So 6 seasons
Hmm.
later. That's pretty crazy, man. You've been busy. It's
Yeah.
exciting. I've definitely watched more than a handful of people that I'm like, I want to hear what she has to say. I'm going to listen to that. So keep it up, man. I think you're doing a great job. It's cool stuff.
Oh, thank you. On that note, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Come back next week as season 10 of the show continues, and I sit down with Chad's producing partner, Chris Juen. Until then, make sure to check out our new website at theproducerpodcast.com, follow the show, and share it with all your producing and filmmaking friends. And thanks for listening.